I've been steadily working my way through the different Chaos Space Marine legions, and one that stood out to me is the Red Corsairs. It's a wonderful example of how the Imperium kind of creates its own problems. Once upon a time, there was a little planet called Badab with a loyal Space Marine chapter called the Astral Claws, who felt that they were being a little bit overtaxed by the Imperium. And it's the Imperium, so they were definitely getting overtaxed. They decided to go to war with the Imperium to rectify this injustice, and the Imperium came down really hard, leaving only 200 Astral Claws as survivors, who eventually re-emerged as the Red Corsairs at Legion strength. So instead of having one loyal chapter of Space Marines, they now have thousands of renegade Space Marines doing pirate hit and run operations on the Imperium. It's a really fun story, and I want to make one of those Space Marines. The Red Corsairs are renegades, not necessarily Chaos Worshippers, but they don't turn their nose up at the powers of the warp either. They're a little bit more pragmatic than your average legionary, so I want to see if I can make this happen on the miniature. I grabbed a Chaos Space Marine legs, bodies, and torso and got to work. Chaos Marines are a little hard to really convert, because not only are they super spiky and detailed, but their legs and bodies are fused together, so mostly what I have is the upper body to work with. The Red Corsairs are pirates. You could call them piratical, and any good swashbuckler needs a sword and pistol. I found some arms I liked the look of and got to work cleaning them up. On the bolt pistol, I drilled out the barrel. I don't know why, but I've been having a really hard time drilling out Chaos Space Marine bolter barrels. They must be slightly smaller than their loyalist counterparts because I keep almost breaking them. I loaded up the arms with thick plastic glue, which is regular Tamiya cement with sprue melted into it. This fills up the joints and dries nice and strong. Then I went into my bits bin and looked for some Space Marine bits. I found some loyalist Space Marine shoulder pads. The Corsairs started out as a loyal chapter, so these could be a relic of their origin story, or more likely stolen off a dead Marine. And I found a loyalist backpack too. This bit was once part of my Black Templar crusade. Back in the day, I ripped these off to replace them with jump packs. My Templar's army would be shuddering if they knew it was getting recycled onto a Chaos Space Marine. I used a combination of green stuff and super glue to get these parts to fit nicely. Now, any good pirate needs plenty of pockets to stash their booty, so I grabbed a bunch of pockets off the Space Marine Intercessor sprue and glued these onto his belt and hips. The thick Tamiya cement helped get these to fit where I wanted them. And the last little detail I found was a shoulder shield. You don't see these much on Chaos Space Marines, but I think it makes them look dapper. My little Red Corsair is sporting a number of Loyalist Space Marine accoutrements. I love the idea of the Chaos Space Marines stealing Loyalist stuff and using it against the Imperium. It just makes the threat of Chaos that much more intense. And the Red Corsairs are a really interesting part of Chaos Space Marine lore because they're kind of the best version of Chaos, or at least the most understandable. Usually when people think of Chaos Space Marines, they think back to the Horus Heresy and like the 50-50 split of the Primarchs and Legions into the good guy side and the bad guy side. But really, Space Marine Legions fall to Chaos all the time, often for very justifiable reasons, like the Red Corsairs. The Red Corsairs started out as the Astral Claws, the best Space Marines to ever Space Marine. They were so perfect at everything that they did. They managed to make a whole bunch of successor chapters, which is almost unheard of for a 10th founding chapter without a known gene sire. These guys were amazing, and they got one of the worst jobs in the Imperium. They were in defense of the Maelstrom, a horrible spot in space where literally there's just a hole to the warp, and every single day they're attacked by aliens, heretics, and Xenos. It's a really, really bad gig, but the Astral Claws did their job. They defended the Imperium so perfectly that at one point, they had the Maelstrom on the ropes, and they asked the Imperium for just a little bit of reinforcements because they were pretty sure they could make the Maelstrom safe. And the Imperium, in their infinite wisdom, said, no. By the way, your taxes are going up. That was kind of the beginning of the end for the Astral Claws. But the Astral Claws did not turn traitor right away. Instead, they decided to do their duty. Sure, they blew up the tax ships, but they used those extra resources to bolster their own numbers so that they could continue to defend humanity from the Maelstrom and hopefully defeat it. They even got some help from their fellow Space Marines, the Mantis Warriors and the Lamenters, because these guys are bros and they helped their fellow Space Marine. But then the Imperium showed up and they weren't happy about the 4,000 Space Marines or the no taxes thing, and so they decided to have a little Badab war. And they kind of defeated the Astral Claws from 4,000 Battle Brothers down to 200, so the Astral Claws limped away. But they continued to be awesome, and in the warp they managed to swell their ranks from 200 back up to full Legion strength. They are now at the same power level as the Black Legion, Abaddon's Legion. They're like the second most powerful Chaos Warband in the galaxy because these guys are the Astral Claws. They're good at anything they do, and if they put their mind to it, they can do it. Now, probably in the future, Huron Blackheart, the chapter master of the Red Corsairs, is gonna have a war with Abaddon. And Abaddon will probably win because man, oh man, does Abaddon need a win. And I kind of feel bad for Abaddon. He has 12 failed crusades under his belt, just kind of because he has to. If he was winning, Chaos would be winning. And so they have to make the Imperium look good. And so that kind of means that Abaddon has to look bad. But it's gonna be really sad if he manages to defeat Huron Blackheart because the Red Corsairs kind of never did anything wrong, and they were punished really harshly for it. My little Corsair needs a good base, and as these guys love to jump onto ships and planets and wreck stuff, I want an industrial base. To do this, I'm gonna grab some Eons of Battle Grim Battlefield basing bits. These are available for purchase from eonsbattle.com. I'm using the girders and rubble packs available as physical prints from eonsbattle.com, and that is not all you'll find there. Each month, members on our website will get a credit that they can use on our new monthly terrain packs or any previous pack we have ever made. For the month of March, we are completing our The Fall Battlefield series with the Battlefield Support, a set of terrain focused around filling a war zone with all the infrastructure necessary for a proper battlefield. This set includes gothically bedazzled tank traps for protection, modular bridges for creating hills and ramps, blown out shell craters for infantry to take cover in, armored carrier buses for transporting weapons and ammunition to and from the front lines, and pallets of all the supplies a growing campaign needs. This pack of terrain perfectly complements the fall buildings and the fall guns and is the perfect way to add those finishing touches to make a battlefield look real. I filled out the floor with some girders, making one really tall piece of rubble that is just perfectly out of the way for my Space Marine to stand. Once I had the parts laid out where I wanted them, I locked them into place with some ultra-thin superglue. Once that was dry, I sprinkled on some sand over top and I used a brush to push and pull the sand into all the in-between parts of the metal, and I locked it down with even more ultra-thin superglue. Now to get my Marine to stand. I bet I could get away with supergluing him down. Space Marines have some nice big feetsies, but he is up on one leg, so I decided to pin him, drilling 1mm holes into his foot in the base and using some 1mm brass rod to connect the two. Now I can get him up onto a paint handle and start to think about what colors I want to use. I started out with a black prime, and if you can believe it, the Red Corsairs are red. I always struggle to paint red, and I do it a little bit differently every single time. I started out with a sponging of a dark red. This sponging will start to create a texture. Chaos Marines aren't known for taking great care of their armor, so it should be a little rougher than the Filthy Loyalist sets. I used a small dry brush to get this color into some of the harder to reach spots, and then I added a bright red color. This is a big step up from the dark red, and it looks pretty intense, but I will be knocking it down later on. I used a watered down red speed paint and glazed this over everything. This darkens all my colors and turns all the parts that were still primer black into a dark red. Now for the trim, and the Red Corsairs have black trim. Black trim can be a little bit boring, so after a base coat of black, I came back and highlighted these parts with a blue-black mixture. This color is dark enough that it'll look gray to the eye, but the blue in there will help it stand out strongly against the red armor. The Red Corsairs are kind of a second try from Games Workshop with Chaos Space Marines, but I think the Black Legion got the more striking colors. On his little shoulder shield, I used the black paint from my palette to create the 8-pointed Chaos Star. Maybe this symbol will grant him some favor with the ruinous powers. The Red Corsairs are red, black, and their last color is bronze. To do this, I took a dark brassy color in gold and got to work dry brushing. I rubbed the dark color over his backpack and weapons. This turned them from black to a dark brass, leaving the original black prime in the recesses. Then I hit the same spots with a little bit of gold dry brushing to make them a little bit brighter. This worked really well, and it makes me want to paint a bunch more stuff brass, but for now, I need to finish this guy's armor. I grabbed some silver paint and sponged this on for paint chips, and I did a little bit of dry brushing of this as well to make this guy really beat up. Now for those pockets and pouches loaded up with all the loot he can carry. I base coated these in an army green, and I mixed in some more tan to this color to make lighter shades so I could highlight these. I think army green is a good choice, as not only are the contents of his pockets stolen, but the pockets themselves have been looted off of a whole platoon of guardsmen. My little Chaos Pirate is coming to life. Every time I work on a new Space Marine or Chaos Space Marine, I like to fantasize that I am putting together an army of these suckers, and what would I do on the tabletop? There's actually a Chaos Space Marine detachment built around the Red Corsairs, Renegade Raiders. It gives all ranged weapons assault, which is kind of huge for vehicles. Vehicles don't usually want to get into close combat, so they don't mind giving that up for a little bit of extra movement. And any shooting that takes place on things on objectives get +1 AP. That is also really good. My brain immediately goes to Warp Talons. Warp Talons claws are AP -2, so that would go up to AP -3. That is pretty huge, but really, really boring. Warp Talons are just like the best thing in the Chaos Space Marine Codex, so anything that would help them out immediately puts them into all-star status. It doesn't feel very Red Corsairs-y. I have a couple of other ideas for the Red Pirates. Something that would be incredibly fluffy would be the Hounds of Huron, Chaos Space Marine Bikers. They are not bad, 70 points. They're able to get to those objectives to get those juicy AP -1s. And you can kind of paint them up however you want, because in the lore of the Red Corsairs, there's like 4 different generals who have a really, really easy time convincing Chaos Space Marine Bikers to just join in on whatever the Red Corsairs want to do. So it would actually be really, really fun to have a bunch of different color schemes going on the bikes. Another really fun and flavorful thing that stuck out to me was there is a stratagem in this detachment. When infantry jump out of a transport, so Marines out of a Rhino, when they shoot at something that is on an objective, they can reroll the hit and reroll the wound. That is kind of shocking. It starts to get a little bit worse when you think about what types of units apply to it, Chosen, Space Marine Legionaries, but it also applies to Havocs. And a squad of Havocs can take 4 of the Gatling guns. The Havoc Reaper Chain Cannon is 8 shots. So that is 32 shots that can easily have sustained hits 1, rerolling all the hit and rerolling all the wound. That's actually kind of amazing into anything. And it's only 200 points for the Rhino and for the Havoc squad. That would be a really spicy little thing to have in your back pocket. It's not that crazy. It won't be the end of the game if it dies, but it's really, really fun when you can go to your opponent and say like, take 25 saving throws. With just a 200 point investment, that is a lot of damage. And your opponent is probably worrying about the other big hitters in your army, probably some Warp Talons, maybe some Bikers. They're not going to be thinking about your one little squad of Havocs, and no one takes the Reaper Chain Cannons. But the Red Corsairs can take the Reaper Chain Cannons. Ah, it would be glorious. And speaking of glorious, this guy is looking pretty glorious. He's looking pretty sharp, a little bit of battle damage. But I want to push that battle damage to the extreme. I threw a dark blue onto my palette and glazed this over the base. This blue color will be the perfect backdrop for some rusty rust. I sponged on some of that army green that I still had on my palette. This will look nice and gray on top of the blue, and then I broke out Dirty Down Rust. This is the best rust paint I have ever used. It goes on looking like a transparent red, and when it dries, it develops purples, reds, and oranges as it turns into rust. I spread some of this Dirty Down Rust over spots on the Space Marine's armor and his weapons, and as this dried, it made him nice and dirty. But it also dries darker than the armor on the Mini. I want to spice this up with just a little bit of bright orange. I thinned this down and used it as a glaze, putting it over the rustiest spots of his armor and sprinkling it onto the base. Now for the Verdigris. Because he's red, I picked a much more colorful light blue and glazed this onto the brass weapons and backpack. I thinned this to the point where it was mostly water with just a little bit of paint in it. This looks pretty extreme going on, but as it dries, it'll dim quite a bit and stick around strongest only in the recesses. The Corsairs have red armor, so the perfect color to make for really striking eyes is blue. I used a mid-tone blue to glaze over his eye holes to make them look like they were glowing. Then I used the Verdigris blue to brighten the lenses and edge highlight around the eye sockets, and to finish off the eyes, I put little dots of white paint. I hit the base rim with a coat of gloss black paint, and now my little Chaos Marine is ready to kick Abaddon's butt. Reading about the Red Corsairs actually made me really sympathetic to Chaos. Like, I knew about the Black Legion, and I've read the Horus Heresy, and like, the Horus Heresy is a great story, but the actual Horus's fall to Chaos, the facts of the case aren't as interesting as all the side characters surrounding it. The Red Corsairs are actually really, really interesting. I get the Red Corsairs position, and I kind of want them to win. They're a really interesting, almost redo of Chaos Space Marines, and I really, really like them. I've been toying around with the idea of doing a vanilla Chaos Space Marine army. I've been painting up all sorts of different colors of Chaos Space Marines. I don't need a Chaos Space Marine army. I have a Death Guard army, but the Chaos Space Marines are really, really cool. And the Lord Discordant on Hellstalker would look really, really good in red and rust. I don't even care that that model is probably the worst way to spend 175 points in the Chaos Codex. I really, really like that model. To me, the Red Corsairs are the Chaos Space Marines. They were wronged by the Imperium, almost destroyed by the Imperium, and so now they fight against the Imperium, and that kind of makes perfect sense. The Imperium always invents its worst enemies, and probably the biggest problem right now is the Red Corsairs and the Tyrannid. Don't forget about the Grim Battlefield basing bits available at EonsOfBattle.com, and please leave a comment below what you think of the Red Corsairs, but more specifically, what color of Chaos Space Marine should I look at and learn about next?